Good to go?
Good to go, I think.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Happy Earth Day, and thank you for joining us for our first Facebook Live. I am your host. I am Dominique Gonçalves. I manage the elephant ecology program in Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique. But I'm coming to you from Kent in Canterbury in UK because I'm also a student at this time. Today we're chatting with a good friend of Gorongosa, David Quammen. David's a world-renowned author and journalist, a science writer. You might have heard of him because of many books he wrote, especially The Song of the Dodo, the The Reluctant Mr. Daring. The last one is The Tangle Tree that I had the pleasure to read. And most recently, definitely, you might have heard about Spillover. So today we're going to have this amazing conversation with Dave over the next 30 minutes, and we're going to chat over some coffee. Gorongosa coffee that I'm drinking right now. I choose Speak for the Trees for today. Yes, thanks, David. And we're going to be talking about biodiversity, ecosystem disruption, and zoonosis. So stay with us, and remember, if you stay until the end, you might be one of the big winners of our giveaway today. So, David, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Dominique. It's great to see you again. Great to see you on Earth Day, looking so cheerful, and it's great to be with this group.
Cool. Thank you. So, Dave, I'm going to go straight away to the questions because I know that there's many people who have many questions for you, that we are all curious. We all want to hear from you. So to start, I want to ask you to tell us about some of your experiences in one of the most diverse places on the planet. I know you have traveled a lot, so I want to hear from you some of your experiences and what are the things that these different places have in common.
Well, I could start with, I'm going to close my email, which just went boing. There we go. Okay. Now I'm back. No more boing. Oh boy, I'd love to talk about Madagascar, about the Amazon, about the Congo. I could tell a little story or two from each of those. But the one that comes to mind right now, and Dominique did not put me up to this, is a very diverse place called Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique. And there was a day during my time there when I went out with Matt Hutchinson, a graduate student from Princeton in Rob Pringle's lab, I believe. And we went out with the wonderful helicopter pilot, Mike Pingo, who works at Gorongosa. And we went out in the helicopter to look for African buffalo because Matt was doing a study on African buffalo diets and habitat use, and he wanted to collect some buffalo poop. So he needed some more buffalo poop before he flew back to Princeton. We flew around in the helicopter. We flew over some forest. We flew over some savanna, palm savanna areas, grassy areas. We saw some buffalo, saw a herd of about 50 buffalo. We started to come in. They ran off because of the helicopter. We landed in the grass, got out, started collecting buffalo poop. And before we had taken too many steps, Matt said, "Whoa, a snake." And there was a large snake underneath his feet in the grass. And I was about 13 feet away, more than safe social distancing, about 13 feet away. And I looked down and I said, "There's a snake here too." And it was the same snake.
Oh my God.
Beautiful African python. And then it slithered away slowly and gently in the grass. Mike Pingo said, well, it's got to be a female because the males are small. And this is a large one. It's bound to be a female. Beautiful lady, African python, slithered away very gently, just wanted her privacy, got away from us. And that's the largest snake I've ever seen in the wild. And she was just really gorgeous.
Oh my God. I bet I wouldn't react in the same way because the ones who know me knows that I'm very afraid of snakes, but I would respect her space. So tell me, all these other places you've been and with so many experience, what is the most common thing you've seen in these places?
The most common thing I have seen is probably ants. Ants live everywhere. And Ed Wilson hasn't put me up to saying this. I spent weeks and weeks walking across the Congo forest with Mike Fay 20 years ago on an expedition that Mike called the Mega Transect. He walked for 2,000 miles in a pair of sandals and river shorts across the last remaining great forest blocks in Central Africa, from the northeastern corner of the Republic of Congo across Gabon to the Atlantic Ocean. Took him 456 days. I walked with him for about 8 weeks of that in different sections. And people say, well, you're in the Congo. Were the mosquitoes terrible? No, the mosquitoes aren't terrible. Well, the snakes, yeah, we saw some beautiful snakes. Forest elephants, yes, every once in a while a forest elephant would stampede through our campsite. Other things, beautiful gorillas and things like that. Things that you didn't want to be bit by, large and small. But I learned that the thing that you wanted to respect the most was ants. Ants are everywhere, in great abundance, in great diversity. And if you're walking along on an elephant track behind Mike Fay, and you're wearing a pair of sandals also and a pair of river shorts, which is what we did to go through the swamps and things, you're walking along, and Mike is stopping about every 30 feet to make note of something, a giant tree or some chimpanzee scat or a duiker that he sees in the forest. He's stopping to make notes. So you're walking along, I'm walking along behind Mike, and suddenly he stops. So I stop, and I learned the hard way that when you stop, the first thing you do is look down. Because if you stop wearing shorts and sandals and you have stopped in a corridor of driver ants,
Wow.
you get hurt bad. So you always, before you stop, you look down and you make sure that there's not a line of ants across the elephant trail. And then when you're safe, then you bring your feet to a halt. Wherever,
Thank you so much
I've gone,
for sharing that.
Ants are to be respected.
And to be respected. So my other question for you, David, is, in the midst of so many pressuring issues at this moment, and today we celebrate the 5th anniversary of Earth. Today is Earth Day. So why is it important for us to still remember and to take action for the Earth? Why is it so important to keep the Earth balanced?
Well, it's more important than ever, and it's more difficult than ever, because there are more of us humans than ever. 50 years ago, Gaylord Nelson and some other people founded the first Earth Day, and that was a very important thing. That would have been 1970. Yes, April 22nd, 1970. I was a college senior. And I'm not sure how many people we had on Earth 50 years ago, but I know that 100 years ago, in 1920, we had, I believe it was 1.8 billion people on the planet, 1.8 billion. And now we have 7.7 billion. So 4 times as many as we had 100 years ago. And we probably have at least 2 times as many as we had 50 years ago. 7.7 billion people, humans, smart, hungry, consumers, reproducing, eating, using resources, using energy, causing disruption to what's left of the natural world. These amazing, fabulous, diverse ecosystems that we have remaining in some parts of the world. So it's more important than ever, more urgent than ever, for us to slam on the brakes, or at least really start seriously pumping the brakes in terms of our reproduction, how many humans there are, and our consumption. Because impact on the natural world, it's not just a matter of human population. People say that sometimes, oh, it's all a population problem. It is a population problem, but it's population multiplied by consumption. And those of us who are lucky enough to grow up in the United States have grown up consuming more than our fair share of resources. I don't know what the multiplier effect is that, the average little kid in a Midwestern state in the U.S. consumes in his life versus the average little kid in a village in Central Africa. But we are consuming, particularly people in the Western and the Northern world. We have to get a handle on our total impact that comes from population levels times consumption. And maybe this horrible event that we're going through now will be a a come to Jesus moment, a wake up call for us so that we actually engage afterwards in serious change.
Right. That just gives me to my next question, which is, the situation we are in today may spark change, might be negative or positive. Let's hope for the best and some action maybe. And this definitely might change our perceptions of and attitudes towards nature. So what do you say to the general public, the scientists and policymakers regarding the importance of giving nature space and keeping it in balance, especially because of the days we are facing today?
Yes.
Would you like to talk a little bit about your book, Spillover, and everything?
Well, so we have this pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Is this something that's just happening to us? Are we the victims of misfortune? No, this is part of a pattern that reflects things that we are doing, the things that you and I have just been talking about: consumption, pressure on the natural world. Now that there are so many of us, 7.7 billion of us, we are putting more and more pressure on the natural world all the time. And that means pressure on not just forests and ecosystems, but on the animals that live in those places. And that means bringing us closer and closer to all the viruses that live in all those diverse animals. Every kind of animal that lives in the Central African forest, that lives anywhere in a diverse ecosystem, is a creature that's carrying its own viruses. And as we capture, as we kill, as we knock down ecosystems, we bring ourselves into contact with those viruses. We offer those viruses the opportunity to take hold in a new kind of hosts, And if those viruses happen to be adaptable enough to get into humans and take hold and replicate and then transmit from one human to another, then we have an outbreak. And if we're unlucky, that outbreak turns into an epidemic or a pandemic. And so here we are. We have brought this on ourselves, and we have been unlucky, and we have been unprepared. So now we're dealing with the consequences. I'm hopeful that as bad as this event is already, and as bad as it's going to be, which is much worse than it is already, it might be the moment when we take things seriously and as an entire species rethink the degree of disruption that we're causing, the degree of demand we're putting on the natural world, and the consequences, like the SARS-CoV-2 virus that come from that demand.
Cool. Thank you for answering that. My other point is, science communicators like you have been working for years to inform, educate, warn, and sometimes, alert, but people and governments, whatever. But apparently, they're not always listening. Governments, corporations, even people don't seem to listen. So what else can we do to avoid, sleepwalking again in more disease, in more misery, climate disaster, or species extinction? What do you think?
Yeah, well, you're right that that this is not. Nobody should be surprised by this event. There are people who've been beating the drum of warning about this event, and I was one of them when I published my book Spillover in 2012. I quoted scientists and I reported what scientists had been telling me back then, 10 years ago, and what they had been telling me in answer to the question, will there be a next big one? Will there be a global pandemic? They were saying, yes, there will be a next big one, a pandemic. It'll be caused by a virus. What kind of virus? Well, a virus that comes out of animals of some sort. What kind of animals? Well, possibly a bat. What particular kind of virus? Well, some kind that evolves quickly, such as one of the influenza viruses or one of the coronaviruses. Where would this spillover from animal to human happen? Well, someplace where humans come in contact with wild animals, such as in a wet market, where, well, maybe in China. They were telling me this 10 years ago, and I put that into Spillover, and I was not the only writer who was amplifying these warnings that the scientists were giving. The politicians probably heard these warnings, some of them, most of them, not from me or the writers, but from the in-between people, from the public health officials that were supposed to be helping us be prepared. Those public health officials, many of them made great efforts to get us prepared. The policymakers, the budgeters, the legislators, the national leaders generally failed miserably. to spend the money and spend the political capital and exert the political will to have us prepared for this pandemic. Then the lessons from that are that we should continue beating the drum. We should continue insisting that our leaders pay attention to this, and if they don't, we should get rid of them. We should get rid of them right away. We should vote them out. And I won't get any more political than that on Earth Day.
Cool. Thank you, David. But you know, when you say we have to start beating the drum, and that's exactly what a lot of people have been saying, that even scientists need to start communicating more, you know, openly to general public, to more consumable, easy digested, just digestible information for general public and policies, etc. So do you have any tips to young science that wants to maybe be better in communication? And you know, what any tips on how to combine scientific rigor with a compelling and accessible message to mobilize public?
Well, this is interesting. Yeah, Dominique, I get this question every so often from scientists. Tell us how to be better science communicators, because scientists are told you need to communicate your findings, your results, your research to the general public. You may have grants, you may be on government money of some sort, you have other responsibilities to the public, so you need to communicate your science. But I take exception to that a little bit, because being a scientist is already a full-time job, as you well know. It's a difficult job, it's demanding. And yes, you write when you're a scientist, you write reports and you write journal articles. That's a very particular kind of writing. It's writing for other scientists. It's not writing for the general public. It's very dense, it's very formal. It's not page-turner writing, it's very utilitarian writing for the purposes that it's intended for. The fact that science should be communicated to the general public does not mean that scientists have to learn to be writers, have to learn to be lively communicators. Your job is hard enough already. But here's what I think. I think that one of the ways that scientists can do that is, and I don't mean to say this selfishly, but it is to be available to science journalists, to be available to journalists who come to you, and let them do the storytelling for the general public, but you make it possible for them to do their jobs by being accessible to a certain reasonable degree, to responding to journalists when they ask you for an interview, when they ask you to speak about your work. But don't waste time on every journalist, because some journalists are in a hurry, they're not careful, they might be lazy, they might be rushed by tomorrow morning's newspaper deadline. They might not have done their homework when they come to you. Be selective and have a sense of which science journalists you can count on to double check to get the facts accurately, and give your time to them. Give your accessibility to them. Don't waste your time on every journalist just because you get a phone call, but do invest in helping to educate some journalists as to your work so that they can educate the general public about it.
Cool. Thank you. So, considering all the subjects we've talked about, is there anything you'd like to add?
I just want to say hello to my friends back in Gorongosa. That guy, Matt Jordan, and that guy, Greg Carr, who's not there right now, but will be soon, I'm sure. All those wonderful people that I met during my several trips, Mike Pingo, and a number of others, Claudia, a number of wonderful people at Gorongosa, because Gorongosa is probably the most impressive conservation project I've seen anywhere in the last 30 years.
Thank you, but I'm not done yet. I have one question. This is very my question. I wonder, are you working in a new book idea at this moment?
Funny you should ask. About a year ago, I started work for the publisher Simon & Schuster on a new book. They published my book, The Tangled Tree, and I want to do the next book for them, and they want me to do it for them. And so I started work on a book on the subject of cancer and evolution, cancer as an evolutionary phenomenon, which is a school of thinking about cancer. A tumor actually evolves, and there are some very important implications for that, both in terms of understanding what cancer is and in terms of treating it, therapies. However, when this thing started, COVID-19, I was in Tasmania doing research for that book, and I started getting phone calls and emails and interview requests, etc., because of my book Spillover.
Yeah.
And just a few weeks ago, my publisher Simon & Schuster asked me if I would please push aside for now the Cancer and Evolution book and do a book for them on COVID-19. There are going to be a lot of books about COVID-19. Probably every publisher in New York is going to have a book about COVID-19. But Simon & Schuster has been nice enough to say to me, well, David, we want ours to be from you. So that's what I'm going to be doing. And I'll be going to places like Wuhan and South Korea and Singapore and Northern Italy as soon as it's reasonable to travel to start the research on this book.
That's exciting to hear. I'll wait for that. And, you know, we got many other questions from our friends on Instagram, on Facebook. So let's just go to them too.
Okay.
So one of the questions comes from Eric. He says, what did you see on your travels? And he says, what did you see on your travels and talks with experts that inspired you to write Spillover? So what made you write Spillover?
Well, what initially inspired me to go after this subject was Ebola virus. I mentioned walking across the Congo with Mike Fay. There was one point when we walked for 10 days through Ebola habitat, a particular stretch of forest that we knew was Ebola habitat. We knew Ebola virus lived somewhere in that forest in some animal, its reservoir host. We didn't know what that reservoir host was. We just knew that it was there because there had been an outbreak at a village nearby, and that had killed 30 people or so. So the virus was there somewhere. And we walked for 10 days, and I knew that that Ebola kills chimpanzees and gorillas, our close relatives, as well as killing humans. And one of the fellows who was helping Mike Fay as one of his traveling forest crew, I was sitting with him at a campfire one night, and we started talking about this outbreak of Ebola in the village. Well, that was a village that was filled with his family and loved ones, and he was there. And he told me how horrible it was to see your nieces dying and your family members desperately sick and dying. And he told me that at the same time, nearby in the forest, he saw a pile of 13 dead gorillas nearby in the forest. And I knew immediately, well, if it's an Ebola outbreak, it's killing gorillas as well as humans. So the pile of 13 dead gorillas, presumably dead of Ebola. And he said 13, you know, maybe it was a dozen, maybe it was 14. It was a bunch of dead gorillas, but he said 13. It was unforgettable to me. It went into my notebook. I still have the notebook from that day in July of 2000. And that was the moment really when I wanted to learn about the ecology and evolutionary biology of these scary viruses. A virus that hides in some animal, doesn't make that animal sick, falls out of that animal, gets into gorillas, gets into chimpanzees, gets into people, sometimes because people scavenge the meat of these animals, and then causes this terrible disease. So it was the ecology and evolutionary biology of Ebola that started me on this whole subject.
Cool. Thank you for answering, Eric. So Skylar has a question for both of us. She asks, in celebration of Earth Day and taking care of our planet, what is something we're doing well? What is something we're doing not so well? So would you like to start?
No, you start.
Okay. Thanks, Skylar. You know, I think that one thing, I'll start with what I think we're not doing so well is that we see big problems, but we're thinking, such as climate change, but most of us just think that it doesn't exist, or it's someone else's job, or someone else is going to do it, or later, or does not affect me that much, so I shouldn't really care. And that is something really wrong, I believe, and because it's a common problem that one day is going to affect all of us, although some of the people are suffering more because of that now, but it's everyone's responsibility to take action for that. One thing I think we're doing well, I'll talk in a local, regional, small scale. For example, I'll talk about communities that are taking action, communities that are coming over and saying we're going to do with this, we're going to lead with these environmental problems, we want to do this conservation, we want to protect our resources because this is actually our heritage, this is our thing. Communities that are having ownership on their, you know, resources, on their biodiversity and their place. So not only waiting for big members to decide and big tables in other places of the world, but also people in their local places taking action. So I think that's one thing that we're doing now. At least I can speak of my place, which is Gorongosa and Gorongosa National Park. Up to you, David.
Oh, okay. Well, I would pick up right on that in terms of things we're doing well, and just add to that. I think that the one thing that's most important that we're doing well, increasingly doing well, is understanding that you can't do. I'm getting an echo of myself now, but you can't do conservation without doing development for local people, without helping ensure livelihoods, education, good employment, healthcare for local people, a sense of ownership, reinforcing the sense of ownership that local people already have and rightfully have in the ecosystems and the wildlife of their areas. I mean, Gorongosa does this well because throughout the buffer zone, there are local people, something like 200,000 local people living in the buffer zone. And those people there are girls' clubs, there's education, there's small enterprise like Gorongosa Coffee.
Sure.
And it's a wonderful example of this, but there are other examples, other places where this is being done. Making sure that the local people are invested in the conservation enterprise and are feel a partial ownership in it and benefit from it. As Greg has said, he wanted to make Gorongosa National Park the best thing that ever happened to the local people in the surrounding area. And that's the right idea, and we need more of that in all of our conservation efforts around the world.
Cool. And the thing we're not doing well?
Again, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Well, I say that we are, not really tackling climate change is a common problem, and just people not believing on it or hoping or waiting for someone else to solve it or to deal with it, which is actually, it's a problem, a common problem that we should all take responsibility for.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. Certainly, I think we have three parallel problems, the huge parallel problems. One of those is climate change. One of those is loss of biological diversity, and one of those is the increasing threat of pandemic disease. Those three, and they all three. It's not that one is the cause of another. Climate change is not the cause of COVID-19, but it has the same ultimate causes as COVID-19, and that is essentially population and consumption. The amount of disruption we're causing on the natural world, the amount of drain that we're putting for resources of every sort on the natural world. And that's not just local people who need to eat and are eating wildlife. It's also any of us who have one of these, who are customers for minerals such as coltan, which is mined in only a few areas, such as in the southeastern corner of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So by owning a cell phone, we become customers for coltan. Miners go in there and they mine coltan, and some of them eat bushmeat. So we have a responsibility for that happening. And eating the bushmeat is not just bad for gorillas; it's also something that increases the jeopardy of another spillover of a zoonotic disease. So those are the three big problems, and what we're not doing well enough is, I would say, recalibrating our expectations of how much we can reproduce ourselves, how many children we can have, and how much we can consume. We're not adequately addressing the reality that this can't go on forever. This is a finite planet. It's a small planet, and it is not endless in terms of the resources that we can drag from the natural world and put to our own use. So that's the problem with us not addressing climate change, but it's also the problem with us not adequately addressing those other two major crises also.
Cool.
On that cheerful note.
True. And I have another question for myself. Kay Riley asks, Dominique, what inspired you to study ecology, and what advice do you give to the girls you mentor? Wow. Well, thanks so much for your question. What has inspired me? So I remember I was in 6th grade in Escola João 23 in Beira, and one of my professors, actually he was one of the guys in the management of the school, a Brazilian priest. He came on that day and he showed us a picture of Wangari Maathai, and that was a green belt movement day. Today we celebrate that, and he was talking about all that she's doing and planting trees and the problem of the ozone and everything. So that was the first spark for me to really pay more attention in biology. I started just liking more biology and being very interested in loving plants. But then I decided to go to ecology because I over the years in high school, I learned that, well, ecology might be what I really want because there's a mix of many things. And then when I got there, I realized that actually when I was studying plant physiology, I was like, oh, maybe I don't really want to start plants anymore. Maybe I switched to animals. And so on I went, and then, going all over to elephants, and where I am now doing a PhD in biodiversity management at the University of Kent. So what I say to the girls when I visit them, well, besides just telling my story and talk to them, chat to know how they are, what they're doing, I always try to, validate their feeling that it's hard. Many of us men have different challenges in our homes and in their homes too. So I always validate that feeling that I know it is hard. I know you might not see the result or any future in this moment, but believe that it can come, and stay strong and learn. This is the gateway for all of us. And you guys, you girls, one day gonna really make something unbelievable. Look at me now, and look at so many other women around us. And that's basically what I do. Of course, it's not always like this and these lines, but there's always that moment, that very emotional moment. And most of the times it's also playing. So that's one of the things I would do. Last question for you, Dave, comes from James, and he says, well, you are definitely one of the favorite science writers for many people. So who is your favorite science writer?
Edward O. Wilson.
Oh, okay. That was quick. Well, thank you so much, Dave. And now I have to announce our winner. Remember that the people who were sending questions way before we made this the random draw before the broadcast, and the winner of today's giveaway is Skylar. So congratulations, Skylar. Our team will be in touch to send you your prize. And well, enjoy your prize, and thank you so much for tuning with us. So Dave, we have to wrap up, and I just wanted to say again, thank you to the audience for joining. Thank you for your comments, for your involvement, especially today. Thank you for joining us. I know that many things are going online and you have so many things to see, but thank you for being with us. Thank you, Dave,
Dominique,
for your time.
My pleasure. Yeah. And if I can add one thing to what you said earlier,
sure.
And it's about what one person can do, starting to face the difficulties of getting an education and all that. 60 years ago, this July, there was a young woman from England who had a secretarial degree. She didn't have a PhD in science or anything.
Right.
And somebody trusted her with a job, and
I know.
She was sent out to the east shore of Lake Tanganyika with a tent and a couple of pots and pans and a pair of binoculars to start studying chimpanzees. And her name was Jane Goodall.
Yep.
She's made quite a difference.
Thank you so much for bringing her up. And yes, Jane Goodall started like that too. So great inspiration for many of us. And I want you to say, keep thanking you. And also I want to say a big hello, a big thank you to my friends, to my colleagues that are now in the ground in Gorongosa National Park. I miss you all a lot, and I hope to see you soon soon. And keep strong. And I've been thinking about all of you, and happy Earth Day. And I also want to take this opportunity to introduce our coffee conversation series. So next week we're kicking off a weekly coffee conversation series. So keep an eye on Gorongosa Coffee social media for more details. And thank you so much.
Thank you all. Yes.
Thank you. Bye, Nate.
Dominique.